This small piece of road in Tibet is the subject of our film, together with these Chinese trucks and the rebels who ambushed them. They are Khamba guerrillas, exiled from Tibet, but of vital importance to India and China in their power struggle for the Himalayas. A massive frontier of rock and ice, the Himalayas seem cast by nature to keep India and China apart. Yet somewhere below, some incident every year brings the world close to war. On our flight is George Patterson, an authority on the Himalayan conflict between Peking and Delhi. We jointly believe that the most unpredictable factor in the shifting balance of power is the guerrilla army inside Tibet. So we're flying together to Kathmandu, capital of Nepal, to contact the agents of the Khamba guerrillas. For George, Kathmandu is a great passageway between India and Tibet. Everything comes from these two countries, everything yearns back to them. Tibetan deities and Indian gods. Nepal is the chameleon of Asia, and so the streets are home for the spies of two nations, and the palace traditionally balances India's power against Tibet's. But at our visit, the Prime Minister is playing this historical game through an unusual form of diplomacy. To strange Nepali music, before an audience of diplomats, the king in the middle sits through a speech in a foreign language. Then the ruler of Nepal walks towards a new hospital. The hospital's given by people in America. Another day, another band. The king listens to another speech. And then into the terminus of a new ropeway, also given by the Americans. The ropeway replaces an old British-given ropeway and carries freight to an Indian-donated road. The king inspects it and a new Chinese road from a helicopter presented by the Russians. The Chinese move forward, but the Russians are waiting to help the king down. Walking on the new Chinese Kodari Road, surrounded by international present givers, the king knows that each gift binds the receiver, that this road makes Chinese invasion possible. It's a slightly comic game played against powerful opponents by a lone man who can do little but maneuver. But everyone knows the Kodari Road changes the game itself. The jeep track will soon become the first highway on which tanks can move from China to India. Only 15 years ago, there were no proper roads in the Himalayas, till the Chinese opened the bidding by building the first military highway in Tibet. India countered with a road to Kathmandu, then matched by Chinese routes to the frontier. Finally, crossing the Himalayas, the Kodari road reaches Kathmandu, and the city's calm seems one of suspense, as if waiting for the peace to shatter. Violent and hysterical, but the mob is religious, not political. The chariots and gods of Nepal's fanaticism have always come from India or China. Just as today the idealists with a cause, who maneuver in the back alleys, are those of the outlawed pro-Indian Congress Party and the outlawed pro-Chinese Communist Party. In the cafes, members of the parties meet. Both parties started revolutions recently, and both are now contemplating revolutions that will favor either India or China. It's in this world of cafe intrigue and propaganda newspapers that the anti-communist Tibetans are to be found. One group produces a newspaper, but other groups deal with the Tibetan guerrillas. The cartoon is of Chinese tortures in Tibet. In different bars with different men, we arrange to march to the guerrillas' base on the border of Tibet, and then news breaks that an anti-Chinese politician has been assassinated. He was the prime minister of a neighboring Himalayan kingdom, and as his murderers are brought to trial, their confessions reveal a Chinese plot. From Bhutan, the crisis begins to spread. As troop movements flood the news, we want to know if the Khamba guerrillas could delay the Chinese divisions on the roads behind the frontier. The guerrillas have 5,000 men, based on the Mustang region spread along the frontier, ambushing the Chinese highways. Our goal is a patrol at Zum Valley, near the Kodari road. They are Tibetan refugees who form the whole of our party, except for this Nepali liaison officer. Our porters never let him discover the objective of our journey. Three laborious weeks, and then the gorge leading to the sacred valley of Zum. Here, one of Tibet's three patron images is guarded from the communists, behind a gorge entrance marked with a Buddhist Mani inscription. In the valley of Zum, no animal may be killed, no blood may be spilt, and the people are led by the monastery at the center. Dalai Lama's portrait carried back towards Tibet in hatred of the Chinese and in hope of reconquest. Many of the monks and people fled here from Tibet, so they're united and suspicious of outsiders. Our problem is to know which of these people are guerrillas and how to break the secret. Any man could be a Khamba without a gun, any tents could be a Khamba camp, and Tibetan valleys keep secrets for years. So in the main stone house, the chief of our porters establishes his credentials and ours before the headman. Ceremonial tea drinking goes on for several days, as we explain why we want to assess and publicize the Khamba raids. Below, in our camp, the news is that war has not broken out, but that there's still considerable tension. And then, on the third day, we're surprised to hear from the headman that some Khamba guerrillas urgently need medicine. Apparently, a small patrol is camped not far from this house, just across the valley. There are only 2 tents and 17 men, but one of them has gangrene which George is asked to cut away. His foot was frostbitten on a raid in Tibet. George speaks fluent Khamba, and the second in command, Asang, recognizes him as the foreigner who lived with his warlord in Tibet. George explains our purpose, and Asang reveals that George helped when the Khambas planned their revolt against the Chinese to rescue the Dalai Lama. So the patrol leader, Tenda, offered to take us on a raid, if this was approved, in the monastery, before the sacred image. The bowl contains 2 balls of dough, representing opposite decisions. Tenda was a very devout man, and for him the paper contains the image's decision. It says we are to enter Tibet. They're praying for the success of the raid and for the vindication of their persecuted religion. This group of Khambas move up the valley a few days later, with guns and ammunition on a pack horse. We travel separately, saying we're going to film nomads in the higher mountain valleys. These nomads became desperate under the harsh terms of Chinese government, so they fled 2 months earlier, while our Khambas fought in the rear, a reminder that people are the subject of the war and that China was accused before the UN of genocide. Nomads move their tents freely, which is intolerable to a communist state, genuinely but forcibly reorganizing Tibet's economy. And so those who insist on the ancient freedom of the moving tent have been put in labor camps. The old have been liquidated and the young sent to China. And so too the nomads look on Tenda as a savior and a protector. He's told that there are no Chinese patrols moving near the border, and that the tribal council have agreed to guard all the passes to Tibet. Beyond the pass stands a Chinese post, and these gnome-like figures are watching for any possible informers tempted by the head price on Khambas. They watch into the middle of the next night. We're moving at night in case of Chinese spies. Fairly early, dawn begins to strike the tips of the mountains on the frontier, and by the time it's light, we're climbing in a part of the ranges where nobody lives. Ahead is our pass, but we rest at a camp set up by Khamba scouts sent over on previous nights. Tibetan tea mixed with yak butter. Then Tender is told by the scouts about the ambush site. The route they had chosen leads over a 20,000-foot pass, and for the rest of this day we climb slowly. At this height, the air is so thin that frequent stops are necessary for oxygen to re-enter the bloodstream. The Khamba's base is supplied regularly by secret airdrop, and our patrol has 1 Bren and 8 carbines or rifles. They say their suppliers limit ammunition to 1 raid a month, and are against any major onslaught at present, but they're silent about which nation is supplying them. As we get higher, our movements become heavier and the cloud grows thicker. Welcome cover on the bare snow face from patrols sent out by the Chinese posts to either side. It was nearly 13 hours since we set out, but at the summit the Khambas paused to lay down Buddhist prayer flags to pray for their conquered country. At 20,000 feet from such hardened soldiers, it's an unexpected and pathetic ceremony. The flags are left, an abandoned symbol in the snow, as the Khambas cross the border into their equally abandoned country. "13 hours to go up, but going down, of course, is quicker." At last we see our first view of Tibet, and our route to the ambush site lies beneath us. We're moving in narrow gullies so that it's difficult to be seen. By evening, the terrain changes. We're to move concealed in the innumerable valleys and folds for most of this night. But back in Zoom Valley, we know that most of the inhabitants are praying for our success. Their faces are peasant faces from the center of Tibet, without the hard look of the bandit Khambas from the east. These men traditionally fear the Khambas, but because communism forced the Dalai Lama into flight, so they have united in a holy war. And so the whole valley prayed, and the huge prayer wheel at the monastery turned incessantly on our behalf. By the second day, our route has taken us close to the Tibetan section of the Kadari Road, between the Chinese garrisons Dzongkha and Kirong. As we hide in a fold of the ground and the Khambas clean their weapons, we learn from Tender that he deserted as a high-ranking monk when his family was liquidated. Khambas are traditionally unmoved by killing, but Tender is tortured by his damnation as a man of violence, and is equally upset at this monastery nearby when he finds the scriptures and images smashed by the Chinese, who publicly proclaim that they protect Buddhism. An ominous promise for the next day, his face and the dark, grim statues left inside. By dawn, we're above the road which winds beside a river, and the Khambas had chosen this corner for the ambush. This is our camera position on the hillside above, and the Kambas are below on a ridge 100 yards to the right, so well camouflaged that you can only just see them moving. Our guard makes sure we don't peer over the ridge at herdsmen below till their backs are to us. The Kambas are nervous that the sun might flash on our lenses, and so warn lorries approaching on the road. So our orders are to sit with our guard behind the ridge till the first gunfire. All we could see were stationary trucks and bullets firing at someone hidden beneath. The back's empty, but a Kamba runs out to blast the Chinese underneath. There's a Chinese soldier. Though we can see him from our position, the Kambas can't because of the truck, just as we can't see the Chinese behind the trucks further up. The Kambas are desperate to get him, as he could radio to cut our retreat. But he gets to the riverbank and slowly creeps away out of our arc of vision. Back at the trucks, the Kambas are still firing at a Chinese we can't see. We think this Kamba must have got someone, but all that we can actually see from our position is a tire punctured by his bullets. But then a Kamba we hadn't seen slowly staggers across the desert, almost under us. Immediately comes the signal for retreat and all the filming to stop, so that they can get the wounded man out. You can just see a blood stain on the back of his left shoulder. And this diagram of the trucks and road shows what happened, as it was sorted out afterwards. Most of the Kambas were on this corner, and with accurate shooting killed the drivers of the first 3 trucks in their cabs. Another 3 or 4 Chinese hid behind the trucks, until Tender got most of them with a grenade. But the 4th truck stopped closer to our position, so though we could see the man who escaped, most of the Kambas couldn't. And when the Chinese ran to the riverbank, out of our camera's arc of vision, only one Kamba went after him. This was Gabo, the eldest. He must have gone berserk, for instead of shooting, Gabo ran up close to stab. But when he reached for his knife, he remembered he'd lent it to someone the night before. Just then the Chinese shot him with a Mauser, and when they grappled on the ground, knocked him partially unconscious. Soon after, the Bren gunner killed the Chinese with a grenade. But when the retreat had been ordered, and he and Tender had carried the old man to a concealed gully, he apparently died in their arms. So they took his religious god box, which never leaves a live Kamba, and we started a non-stop 15-hour march for the pass, racing the Chinese patrols trying to cut us off in the mountains. And 3 days later, back in Nepal at the Kamba camp, a spy from the Chinese garrison at Kirong is being questioned by Tender. The information is that the Chinese reached the ambush shortly afterwards, but he tells Tender no Kamba bodies had been found. Then a local Tibetan brings the amazing news that high in the mountains, above the cloud covering our valley, Gabo, who we'd left for dead, has been found staggering into Nepal. George peels off his blood-stained clothes. Gabo is 52 years old, but amazingly tough. He'd been unconscious for several hours, but somehow the Chinese missed him. And then he'd woken up and staggered back, wounded and foodless, dodging the Chinese patrols. The bullet was fired from low down. It passed close to the heart and out the back. The cuts are where the Chinese battered him with a stone. Once his wounds were dressed, Gabo starts to discuss plans for the next raid. And we feel that if Gabo and his patrol are typical of the 5,000-man Kamba army, then we had learnt from this small raid that the Kambas would one day be a serious menace to the Chinese roads. But next day, an idyllic peace hangs over the valley, and war seems unthinkable. But from under the Himalayan calm, the signs of religious violence break to the surface in a ceremony for the patron deity of Dzongkha, where the ambush trucks came from. A valley united in hatred. Perhaps the demons of the past are no match for communist China, but they unite the exiles in a craving for vengeance. And in any war between India and China, the hatred swirling about the demon could block the roads when the pinprick raids become the invasion of the Kamba army.